something that may or may not violate your own personal opinion, regardless of what the program is being aimed for. So we've always been opposed to that type of thing. We will stand up to protect Canadians' charter rights for freedom of opinion, and we'll remove the attestation from that program.
Hi, Andrew. I am an entrepreneur. I'm a small business owner. I live in Delta, British Columbia. You know, it's tough. It's tough out there for us. If we don't work, we don't eat. And we're getting sick and tired of the government taking the boots to us. So I want to know, when you become Prime Minister, will you repeal all the changes made to CCPCs?
So you're absolutely right. Yeah. When the conversation around the tax changes, when the conversation started around the changes to the tax system, all the rhetoric neglected to appreciate the fact that small business owners use these types of programs for things like self-funding their maternity leave, or having some kind of a retirement program that are not available to small business owners. So we fought against it. We voted against the changes. We are opposed to those types of changes, and we will be, as part of our campaign platform, unveiling significant changes, measures to our tax code to reward hard work, incentivize people who have taken the risk, who have spent those early years borrowing money to make payroll, you know, mortgaging their home to make sure that their salaries are paid for their employees, and making Canada the type of place where people want to do that. Our campaign platform will speak to making that type of thing easier and undoing the damage that the Liberal changes have made.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Scheer. It's good to see you again. My name is Cecilia, representing Surrey Board of Trade Political Engagement Society. We would like to raise two questions, which reflects widespread concern within the Chinese community. The first one is, as we all know, Canada's relationship with China is tense right now. From the standpoint of Canadian values, if you come to power, what will be your attitude towards our trade policy with China? And the second one, how would you handle the problem of illegal immigrants and refugees? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Obviously, we're at a very difficult point in time with our relationship with China. China represents a major opportunity for economic growth here in Canada. Chinese investment has helped fuel growth for the past few decades in Canada, and people who come from China have built communities and have become a major part of our society, our culture, and our economy. But it's very important that we understand that there are still so many major differences between the government and the economy of China and our own. And I was opposed to Justin Trudeau's plan to pursue a free trade deal with China. I believe that any arrangement with China should always be made through the lens of what the benefit to Canada is. We have to be very strategic in this and look at specific cases. There are so many state-owned enterprises in China. They don't have the same level of transparency. Canadian investors need to know that there is that same protection for them as there would be to Chinese companies. To embark upon a free trade deal where all of a sudden Canadian companies are competing against companies that are bankrolled by the government because they're owned by the state upsets the playing field and in many cases could put Canadian companies at a disadvantage. So in terms of economic engagement, always through the lens of making sure Canada gets the best possible deal in any arrangement. Now, in terms of illegal immigration, we have seen this problem grow for the past few years. We all remember Justin Trudeau's famous tweet where he couldn't resist jumping in on Twitter and tweeting out, "All are welcome." Well, people have taken him up on his word. And the problem is that damages the integrity of our immigration system, and people who are trying to come to Canada the right way are now having to wait longer. I've met with people who have spent years in a refugee camp, who waited their turn, who would have been killed if they left the camp. And they don't understand why someone can come through the United States, upstate New York, and jump the line and skip the queue, forcing others to wait longer. More and more reports show that the number of illegal border crossings is having an effect on longer wait times for people who are immigrating to Canada the right way and refugees who are going through the proper system. It's also costing provinces and cities billions of dollars, $1.6 billion out of the latest Parliamentary Budget Officer's report. So Canadians, once again, are paying for those mistakes, and people who want to come to Canada the right way have to wait longer. Conservatives believe in an immigration system that is fair, orderly, and compassionate, and prioritizes those fleeing persecution and civil war over those who are coming in from a safe third country.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Saf Sabharwal. My partner here is Sukhjan Sidhu. We are the local builders here. And we have I have a lot of realtor friends, a lot of bankers, contractors, and we're all done by this stress test that Mr. Yudo brought in. And he killed a very good housing market that we have here. So once you're in power, are you going to eliminate the stress test?
So thanks for the question, and it's clear that the stress test has had some unintended consequences, pushing the dream of home ownership further out of the reach of many, many young families and first-time home buyers. I've engaged with members of the housing industry, both on the builder side, on the lending side, and those involved in the real estate world, and we're looking at some specific aspects of the qualification rules that were never intended to be part of the original proposal, but that have been interpreted in. But let me say a few things about this before we unveil our entire platform around housing. We need to recognize a few things in this country. First of all, there is no single national housing market. There are differences between the housing market within a province, within a region of a province. You can have a much different dynamic going on here in Surrey than may be happening in Vancouver or Burnaby or Prince George or Langley. And so to have some flexibility based in our housing market is essential to make sure that we're not painting an entire broad brush across the entire country, because there are some markets that may be experiencing unprecedented growth over a short period of time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have to start talking about the supply side of the equation and all the changes in the world to how mortgages are qualified for, how to help people save, or that is only half of the discussion. And I've met with developers and people who want to put more units onto the market who say, my municipal government is standing in the way. This regulatory burden is adding thousands of dollars to the cost of a new unit and pushing the timelines back multiple years. The federal government needs to play a leadership role into helping municipalities hit targets for reducing the red tape and shortening approvals timelines so we can get more inventory on the market, and that'll help alleviate the pressure on prices as well.
Great to see you, Andrew. As a pastor, I counsel many young couples who fear economically about whether they'll ever be able to get married in this country. After you become our new Prime Minister, I'm going to campaign for you. How are you going to make it better for families and marriages so that's more possible for young couples?
Sure. I know many people who feel that they can't start their own family early in life because they're paying back student loans. The idea of owning a home is becoming unrealistic for them, and so they delay either getting married or having children themselves. And that's a big part of what our affordability platform will speak to in terms of housing costs, in terms of helping people save more of their own money. We've got a wide variety of things that we're contemplating, that we're putting the fine tuning on. I'll be excited to campaign on it, but it will all speak to helping people get ahead so that people, individuals, couples, families can make choices earlier on in life should they choose. Empower them to have that flexibility. Right now, many couples, many families don't feel that they have a choice, and that's a very negative thing. I tell the story about my own family. My grandparents lived on Coffer Road in Mississauga. It was a dirt road at the time. He worked at a blue-collar job at Massey Ferguson. My mom was one of 9. Most of her siblings did not go on to post-secondary education, but my generation did. My mom's generation were able to get good jobs, buy homes in suburbs, and then pay or support their children to go on to university. And there's this sense of one generation always getting better and always getting ahead of the previous generation. I believe this country is at a crossroads right now because for the first time, people who are 18 to 25, maybe 28, aren't sensing that they're going to have it better than their parents had. And our whole campaign will speak to making life easier for that group of people so they can get ahead and not just get by.
Good afternoon, Mr. Scheer. My name is Brian McKenna, and I've lived in the community of Delta or Surrey on and off for the last 20 years. One of the things I wanted to ask you and want to hear from you about is, as veterans, often we have two main roles in the community. One is to advocate for our wounded brothers and sisters, to try and make sure that they get the benefits and care that they deserve, that we feel they deserve. I would have to say that on what was promised to the veteran community in 2015 has not happened. And I don't mean that it hasn't happened by a couple percent. I mean it drastically has not happened. What was promised to the veteran community and what is delivered is about 65% less. But as a conservative member, one thing I really want to hear you speak about, I'm proud of my service, happy to do it. I don't need to be thanked. What I do want to know though, I went on a peacekeeping tour in a vehicle that was 30 years old. I've been to war in body armor where I could not turn my head because it was not designed to fit with the other equipment that we had. I have friends serving today where some of them have had to turn in their sleeping bags so that we can equip those going out the door with sleeping bags. I've sat in the passenger vehicle or the passenger side of a vehicle with two bungee cords and using them to pull back and forth the windshield wiper because we didn't have a windshield wiper that was working in the vehicle. I could go on, but you get my point. So benefits are one thing that has been completely missed. What will you do to make sure that when we send the next soldier, sailor, or air person out the door, they have survivable equipment that keep them alive?
Well, I know you don't need to be thanked and not looking for thanks, but I hope you don't mind that I do thank you for your service. And you've highlighted an area on two aspects of that area. One is the benefits and the promises that are made to veterans after they serve, the expectation that the government will be there to deliver on what was promised when the men and women enlisted in the first place. And that's something that I will acknowledge that that we do need to get right. We had, towards the end of the previous Conservative Parliament, our former Veterans Minister, Aaron O'Toole, had reset the relationship with our veterans and was on the cusp of having an agreement with groups that represented veterans for things like pensions and medical benefits after their service. The Liberals campaigned on a very specific promise during the election, and that was that veterans would never have to go to court to get what they were promised. And now we see that they're right back in court defending, the Liberals are defending shortchanging our veterans. Even to the point where the Prime Minister looked a war hero in the eye and told him that he was asking for more than the government could give, which I felt just ashamed to see that exchange with the Prime Minister. So our plan will be to ensure that when something is promised, when a man or woman signs up to serve and put their life on the line, that they get everything that they were promised on that day. That's my commitment. The second thing is on the equipment side that you rightly bring up. And for so many years, for so many decades, Canada's government has struggled to give the very best to our armed forces. And when we ask people to go put their lives in harm's way, it's absolutely essential that the Canadian government gives them the very best tools to do their job. We see with the fighter jets that we are replacing, instead of going with our partners and our allies and getting the very top of the line, cutting edge technology, this Liberal government is replacing our 40-year-old jets in Canada with 40-year-old jets from Australia. That's not That's not right. That's not giving our men and women the very best. Procurement has become politicized in this country, where every election cycle, it's easy for an opposition party to say, we're going to cancel that and use the billions of dollars to spend in other places. I want to have a procurement plan that has a long-term view, a steady renewal, so that every 5 or 6 years there's not the sticker shock of a $5 or $6 billion investment in one area or the other. That it's a long-term plan, and I will attempt to depoliticize the process by bringing the other parties into the decision-making early, so we don't see this every 4 or 5 years pattern where it becomes fodder for an election campaign, and the end result is we've got people using bungee cords to move windshield wipers back and forth. So that's my commitment to you, and thanks once again for your service.
So we're going to take the questions only from those that are in the lineup, and I have one more question for you at the end. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Laura Kane here with the Canadian Press. Just wanted to go back to your comments around the border crossers at our southern border. You and other conservatives insist on calling them illegal border crossers, when the UN and Amnesty International refers to them as irregular because they're in fact seeking asylum at the border, and there's nothing illegal about that. I'm also wondering whether you're feeling, so I'm wondering why you insist on calling them that. I'm also wondering whether you're feeling pressure to go further right with elements happening in our society right now, like the Yellow Vest movement and Maxime Bernier's New People's Party of Canada.
So first and foremost, there's a sign on the border that says it's illegal to cross into Canada. The government itself was calling them. The government itself was calling them illegal border crossings up until a short while ago, and now we find reports of illegal activity where human trafficking groups are actually taking payments to help people come to cross into Canada. That sure does sound like illegal activity to me. It's very convenient for the Liberals to try to lump different issues into this. This is about having the integrity of our border secured, not just for the sake of having a secure border, but to make sure that we can have an immigration system that prioritizes those who come to Canada the right way, those that want to come to Canada through the normal means. And when I talk to new Canadian groups, groups of new Canadians from around the country, whether they've been here for generations or whether they've come to Canada more recently, they explain the frustration when they compare how long it took them to come, years sometimes, to be reunited with a family member, and to see people, to see a government that allows people to come and jump the queue and skip the line. That frustrates them. When that leads to longer delays, both on the refugee side and on the traditional immigration side. So it's not compassionate to allow that to happen. It's not compassionate to force someone who's waiting in a refugee camp to wait longer because someone is coming in from upstate New York. And I've been to upstate New York. It is a safe place. It is not somewhere that you have to flee persecution to get into Canada from. And our system needs to prioritize those who are facing persecution in places where they would be killed if they left the camps, and those coming to Canada the legal way.
And just by Councillor and Maxime Bernier, do you feel compelled to be pushed further right by those two, the Yellow Vest movement and Maxime Bernier?
It's not about left or right on this issue. It's about what's right for Canada. And there are people that are traditionally associated with the left who want to see this issue addressed so that our country can go back to prioritizing those who are facing real persecution. So I'm going to continue standing up for principles and not being worried about politics.
All right.
My name is Connor Fessenmeyer. I actually represent a group Smart Approach to Marijuana Canada. We're a smaller sister group to the U.S. side Smart Approach to Marijuana. One of the few promises that Trudeau did deliver on was legalizing marijuana. It was a poor attempt to do so. One of the biggest mistakes in that you'll see is black market marijuana is a fraction of the price that you can buy legal marijuana. And you don't have to look very far to see that evidence. They proclaim it all over the place on social media posts. Look in the comment sections. It's an ongoing joke for them. They say they're continue buying from a dealer. They're not going to go through legal channels. It's a complete mistake, and it's going to cause more economic loss. And it's promoting the illegal market by simply allowing the illegal market to function more legally by having possession of marijuana of a greater amount and distributing it seemingly unnoticed. I just want to know what you plan on doing to either course correct it or completely eliminate it, or how you plan on trying to fix that problem.
Well, this is one of the only things that Justin Trudeau actually did in his mandate was that was his priority, and that was something that he made very well known to Canadians during the last election campaign. So we are looking at the consequences of that. This is a brand new chapter in Canadian society, one that Conservatives voted against, but one that we recognize as a change that is that cannot practically be unchanged. And so our position on this is that we will examine some of the unintended consequences, the negative effects, loopholes in the law that make children more vulnerable, or make it easier to sell to young people. We want to make sure that our police services are getting the support they need to do things like roadside testing, and that we actually have a testing system that works. I've heard from many police officers across the country that says there's a big gap right now in what's actually available to them. So we're concerned at that, and we'll be watching that very closely. On the overall question, though, we will not recriminalize marijuana now that it is legal, but we will be working very closely with provinces and municipalities to improve upon the regime to make sure that young people are protected, and that we actually get the purpose of this was to get organized crime in the black market out, and if that's not happening, then we do need a federal government that actually responds to that. Thank you.
Hello, thanks for coming today. I'm Gabriel Kiva, the Vice President of External Affairs at the Foreign Students Association that represents over 2,000 students across the Lower Mainland. You mentioned student loans several times in post-secondary education. I'm just wondering, what is your party going to do to make sure that post-secondary is more affordable for students? And not only that, but to ensure that when they graduate, they'll find a job.
Well, our commitment is to provide stable funding to provinces for post-secondary education. That is something that we've seen in the past when Liberals run up these massive deficits, and when I talked about this during the speech, the consequences of these massive deficits, we've seen previous Liberal governments forced to make cuts to these specific areas. So our commitment is to provide stable funding to provinces so that they have the support they need to ensure that university is affordable. We also need to make sure that our student loan regime, where it relates to the federal government, is responsive to changes in our economy and to demographics, and ensures that help is available to those who need it the most. But the second part of that question is key, because even a small student loan is very difficult for people to pay back if they don't have jobs waiting for them. And that's when we go back to why an economic message that creates prosperity and creates that opportunity is the best solution for lifting people out of poverty and giving people opportunity in life. So things like lowering taxes on small and medium-sized businesses, regulatory reductions so that businesses can expand and hire easier will create those jobs. And letting the free market do that by empowering those and rewarding those who take those risks and create those opportunities is a key part of that, because all the funding in post-secondary education, all the more and more money in student loans won't matter if there aren't jobs waiting for graduates on the other end. Thank you.
My name is Michael Wang from the Chinese Beverage Association. Mr. Scheer, appreciate last year you visited our association in Chinatown there. We organized all the parade. We concerned two questions. Number one is regarding the marijuana policy. Within about 2 weeks, we signed more than 3,000 people's signature against in the marijuana open shop in our Chinatown or community or close to the school. Number two is, I'm a resident in Delta, and as a parent, we're very concerned of community safety. In 13 years, Shen, the daughter, the girl is just walking in the park, was murdered. I was restricted for the screening of the immigrations for safety for our society, for our local community. Thanks.
Well, again, on the marijuana side, again, I mentioned conservatives were opposed to the legalization. We had major concerns that this was rushed through, that health experts from around the country, provincial governments, municipalities, you talk about where they're allowed to open. There are many, many levels of government and groups across the country who were opposed to this in principle and also opposed to the pace at which it was rushed through. So as I said, we'll be monitoring that very closely and looking at where improvements need to be made to protect parents. And on crime in general, you know, not any one group, not any one type of person is capable of committing crime. Anyone, we've seen this, people who have been here for, whose families have been here for generations and some who have arrived more recently. The key is to have proper investments in making our community safe. So making sure that our police are well equipped, that our intelligence agencies have the ability to know who people are when they come to Canada. Those are things that all work together. So we don't want to paint any one group with a broad brush, recognizing that crime knows no boundaries and criminal intent can manifest itself in any group of individuals. But again, to go back and say that we need those investments to make sure that at every step along the way, whether it's in a local community, whether it's looking at who's coming into Canada, making sure that the proper checks are done is an essential part of keeping our society safe.
Thank you very much.
Final question from the floor.
Yes, hi Mr. Scheer, I met you I believe 6 months ago, and I want to first give a context to myself. I worked in the financial services industry for 8 years. Recently I'm working with an immigration law firm, so there's a two-tier question. The first question is more about the economy, and as a person who's between 25 and 35, going up in Vancouver, the affordability, that's a huge issue. Like you mentioned earlier, it's domestically an impact. Every community, it has a different impact to it. How would the Conservatives manage that on a national level, and perhaps working with cities on a domestic level? And the second question, and the more personal question, is to you. As a Muslim, Bill C-24 was something I discussed with you last time we spoke as well, that hit me home. And at that time, basically the way it hit me home is, I'm born in Saudi Arabia, and my parents happen to be back from Pakistan. Unfortunately, with the way Muslims are represented in the mainstream media, even a small crime can lead to a high charge. And I've seen that in the news. Sometimes you have reporting on a small incident and it's called a terror incident because the person happened to be from a Muslim background. I want to ensure, if I'm putting my vote to Mr. Scheer, that that policy will not come back and impact me or people who are similar to me. The other thing I want to mention is I actually lived in the Middle East. I've been in Canada for the past 25 years. I've lived in Toronto, but primarily I've been here. I lived overseas in UAE actually. That's where I worked in wealth management. I believe I'm Canadian, and I am Canadian. I don't need to prove that to anybody through any other method, and I don't want the Conservatives to have that proven in the future from me. So those are my two questions. I hope they are questions that you can answer there. Thank you.
Sure, well thank you very much. I'll maybe address the second one first, just because you ended on. First of all, you're absolutely right to point out that terrorism can come through many different groups. It knows no boundaries, and so to paint an entire community again with a broad brush is completely unacceptable. And we always take great lengths to ensure that we are separating those individuals who commit evil acts in the name of a cause that the rest of their community denounce and reject. And we always highlight the fact that there's a difference no matter which community they come from. And we also stand up for the rights of Muslims in Canada to live their faith and to be part of this society. And I was very honored last year to be able to attend the memorial in Quebec City for the shooting at the mosque there, where innocent human lives were taken, people who were at peace, at prayer, targeted just because of their religion. And we have to speak out and denounce those types of actions so that all Canadians, regardless of their faith, know that we celebrate your right. The addition that you brought to Canada with your faith and your culture is just as important, is integral. That is how we become a strong, multicultural, diverse society. So thank you for that. Thanks for choosing Canada, for being committed to Canada. On the issue of housing, as I mentioned, there is so much that the federal government can do to speed up the approvals process. I met with someone just yesterday who was describing the frustration here in the Greater Vancouver area, I won't mention which mayor or which council, but in one of the communities just outside Vancouver, the length of time it was taking to get new units on the market, the costs that keep getting added on. So new homeowners, hidden in their cost of a new unit, can be over $100,000 of fees and permits and compliance costs. So that has to be part of the equation as well. Because I go back, we can change the stress test, we can reduce the amount for a down payment, we can bring in measures that help people save faster, but all that will mean is that more dollars are chasing the same number of units. And if we don't increase the number of new units on the supply, incentivizing things like greater densification within an area or new developments being able to be built faster, then we're not going to see that alleviation on that person.
On that point, from a financial economic point of view, we are seeing higher debt. Canadians are racking up higher debt as compared to even other nations. Perhaps that's a policy that conservatives should help Canadians with as well, to help reduce their debt. Because if we keep taking on debt, eventually when interest rates rise, you won't be able to service them. You're going to have what happened in the States. And once again, from a mortgage point of view, there's a lot of private lending happening at a very high interest rate. And I can't see that as a comparable to what happened in the States. So there is some conservative fiscal policies that need to be drafted to ensure that we don't also make housing so, we don't increase the supply so much that we're providing the market with a lot of housing, but at the same time, that's a lot of debt on the mortgage side, which might not be serviceable 5 years, 10 years later, and that, you know what happens with that. So that's my final point, and thank you for taking my questions.
All right, I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a final question for you is, I'm co-chair of the City of Surrey's Immigration Partnership Table. And we know that the federal government has an immigration plan in the short term. And we do have a skills shortage, a major economic impediment to our business community in terms of finding human capital today and tomorrow. I guess what we're looking for in this upcoming federal budget is more investment and support to those cities like Surrey that bring in refugees, bring in newcomers that need support services, not only housing and ESL, but also enabling our not-for-profits to find them entrepreneurial and career pathways. And I know with our city of Surrey, we have 30 to 35 different service agencies. We're the highest intake city in British Columbia of refugees. And we want to see some support in this upcoming federal budget. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you point out a very real need. We need to have immigration in this country to keep our economic growth going, our population growth, and the federal government plays a huge role in obviously with setting things like innovation targets and through a wide variety of programs to promote integration, to promote skills development. So we're going to be waiting to see what's in the federal budget as well. But all of these types of programs are jeopardized when you have unsustainable growth across the board with the government budget. And so when we see deficits of $25, $30 billion, we know that that's unsustainable, and many of these important programs are at risk if this is allowed to continue. So we will always push the government to support immigrants, to make sure that programs are funded, to do things like ensure that there are skills training, I mentioned that, but also different second language training, so that people who come here with a skill aren't underemployed because they don't